2016 has been an absolutely ridiculous year for Standard. There have been multiple calls for Standard bans, we saw the one and only mid-season rotation, so much has happened. In this video, we're going to count down the top 10 best Standard cards in 2016. Now, before we do that, in case you missed it, we're trying to raise money to help the channel continue. How are we doing this? Say hello to our winner limited edition Mana Source playmat. These are only available for 30 days and then never again, so if you're interested in helping the channel out and getting a beautiful new playmat in the process, you can click the playmat right on your screen or the first link in the description and purchase one through Kickstarter. Super easy and it helps us out a lot. So without further ado, let's jump in. Let me be clear. When I say best, I mean cards that change the format, cards that enabled entire strategies, cards that were everywhere. There are dozens of good cards in Standard, and we can't cover all of them, but as we move through this list, please remember that this is based on the numbers. I've gone through every single Standard Premier event in 2016, adding up literally deck by deck, the cards that made top 8s and top 16s of each event. So when I tell you something is the best, I have the numbers to back it up. Alright, now that you know all of that, we're finally ready. So I don't get a bunch of angry comments, we're going to start with a few honorable mentions, mainly because I guarantee that some of you thought these cards would be on the list. We'll begin with both Liliana the Last Hope and Emrakul the Promised End. I know, hold yourselves together. Both of these cards have proven themselves in the last half year, with Delirium playing a huge part in the metagame, especially post-rotation. While Liliana and Emrakul have been crazy strong, believe it or not, proportionally speaking, every card on the list has actually appeared more often in Premier level events. If Delirium continues its current impressive streak in Standard, I'm sure we'll be talking about these cards again next year. Our last honorable mention is Jace Vryn's Prodigy. To baby Jace's credit, he did most of his best work in 2015, but he was no slouch this year either. Seeing play in Collected Company, Emerge decks, every blue control variant, Dark Jeskai in its heyday, Jace was a popular play. Just because his price was so high doesn't mean that he was the best though. It was a perfect storm of seeing play in multiple formats, being the most busted card in 2015, and he was in a set a lot of players didn't open. That's how you get an $80 card. But in 2016, Dark Jeskai only top 8'd 5 events before most of its parts rotated out. As for Dragons, 6 events. You see what I mean? Again, Jace Vryn's Prodigy was one of the most powerful Standard cards we've seen in some time, but in 2016 there was a lot of competition. Alright, onto the list itself. When you see these cards, you'll understand why the honorable mentions were so ridiculous. We'll begin with number 10, Sylvan Advocate. Finishing in the top 16 of 264 Premier events this year, Sylvan Advocate set the standard for 2-drop creatures in Standard. Played in literally every deck that can run it, the Advocate provided solid early game pressure with a late game inevitability that no one wanted to deal with. Once you dropped an Advocate, your opponent had to do something or they would probably just die. It may not be the flashiest card in the world, but Sylvan Advocate was a consistent playset in the top 4 most played strategies in 2016. One of the reasons green was so dominant, and one of the best green 2-drops we've had in some time. The Advocate earned his spot easily. Coming in at number 9 is Selfless Spirit. Now remember, when compiling this list I did account for time spent in Standard. So while Selfless Spirit has only spent one half of the year in this format, it's already top 16 to Premier events 222 times. 222 decks had playsets of Selfless Spirit in them. What is now the most used anti-board wipe spell in Standard, Selfless Spirit saw play right out of the gate, being adopted by Collected Company as the most ridiculous insurance policy ever. That rotates out and boom, Selfless Spirit becomes a staple in both white-red vehicles and blue-white flash. Now while none of these 3 decks were based on Selfless Spirit, the Spirit certainly changed the format, forcing players to play around the difficult to deal with protection spell. By sheer volume and obvious effectiveness, Selfless Spirit deserves its number 9 spot. Number 8 is Ishka Graph Widow. I know what you're thinking, Emrakul and Liliana were honorable mentions, but Ishka is number 8? I'd be surprised too. Here's where it took a turn. While Emrakul is played in Aetherworks Marvel and obviously Delirium, and Liliana is played in zombie decks, some control variants, Ishka is played in every Delirium deck and most Emerge variants. When Emerge sprung onto the scene, Ishka was everywhere in multiples. Citing the volume of play, Ishka definitely beat out both Liliana and Emrakul. An extremely annoying threat, Ishka can change the course of a game single-handedly, and doesn't cost a million mana. It's all about the numbers. Flying in at number 7 is Quellar. This stupid spirit has been a menace in Standard since literally the day it became legal. Immediate adoption into any deck running blue and white, the Quellar was anti-collected company, anti-tokens, anti-control, anti-flash. It was a nightmare from the start and it never let up. Top 16 finishes in over 200 decks in less than 6 months is an absurd statistic. And even after rotation, seriously, didn't stop. It actually got worse, with Quellar leading the new charge against vehicle decks, basically blanking 90% of the spells in any vehicle's variant, or even better, its own deck, Blue-White Flash, effectively countering everything in there. Quellar has been a true menace in Standard, and it shows. The card gets results. Jumping in at number 6 is Reflector Mage. Yeah, Reflector Mage. I shouldn't have to tell you that the second this card was printed, everyone knew it was going to be a huge issue. Printed at the easily accessible uncommon slot, it only took about 3 seconds for everyone to get their playset. Once that happened, there were no rules. Top 16ing over 300 times since release, Reflector Mage was a staple in collected company decks, Blue-White Flash, and this is the best part, it actually made a ton of human decks go blue just so they could play Reflector Mage. This card was so good that it actually made players change entire mana bases just to include it. You can't tell me that isn't real power right there. Reflector Mage is straight nonsense, and the tempo swings that it creates are unmatched for the cost and efficiency. No brainer, it had to be on the list. Numbers, they don't lie. Top 5, things are going to start getting ugly. Remember this card? Yeah, that's right. Rally the Ancestors is number 5. Absolutely dominating early 2016, there were calls for Rally to be banned. The deck this card enabled was impossible to outlast and really difficult to deal with outside of a few super weird and otherwise useless sideboard cards. Alongside Zulapur Cutthroat, Nantuko Husk, Catacomb Sifter, and more, Rally the Ancestors became the most hated deck in the format. It was tedious, people absolutely hated playing against it, and the inevitability was always there. It was a complete nightmare. Of course, it didn't last in Standard that long, as Rally would rotate in spring, but it only took a few months to make an impact, an awful, nightmarish impact. The number 4 best Standard card in 2016 is Smugglers Chopper. No, I'm not joking. No, I'm not crazy. Yes, this card was just printed a few months ago, but in that time, in that short time, Smugglers Chopper has top 16'd, ready for this? 300 times. 300 decks, top 16 tournaments running Smugglers Chopper. I haven't seen a card this singularly dominant since, well, Baby Jace last year. It seems like every deck runs the Copter. Outside of Delirium and Aetherworks strategies, everything considers the Copter. It's just too good not to run. And while again, yes, it's only been in Standard for a few months, we're talking about a card that is actively in almost 60% of all Standard decks. Right now. That's an absolutely unbelievable statistic. While the Copter doesn't create a strategy out of nowhere, it's so singularly powerful that it forces all players to be ready for it or lose. That's influence. Number 3 is a card we all knew would be on the list, Archangel Addison. No surprises here. A staple in every deck that runs white, Addison is the keystone creature in Standard. If you play a deck, any deck, you have to have a way to deal with Addison, either in your main or sideboard. Why do you think players run so many Tears of Advocate or Clipwings? The upside against Addison is too good to pass up. Much like Sylvan Advocate is the pinnacle all 2-drops are compared to, Addison is the bomb all bombs are compared to. Top 16ing in 345 decks since last spring, it's pretty clear where Addison goes, victory follows. Simply put, Addison is a busted creature with a busted transform ability that requires a specific answer or the game is over. Done. I know you all expected this to be number 1, but it's number 2. Collected Company. This card has been talked to death. The boogeyman of summer, Collected Company enabled a creature-based, tempo-ruining mid-range deck that seemingly no one could fight. The value generated on each cast, too much to deal with, especially in a format that didn't have the tools to board wipe effectively, or deal with the general overpowered nature of 3-mana cost creatures. On this list alone, the company had Quellar, Reflector Mage, Sylvan Advocate, and Selfless Spirit to work with. Imagine the power of that deck. Actually, you don't have to. You saw it. You saw what it did. Games went on forever if you couldn't beat it quickly. It won in the most annoying ways possible. Everything about Collected Company was rough, but that doesn't change the facts. Collected Company created the most infamous deck of 2016 by far. Alright, number 1. You've seen pretty much everything else. Can you guess what it is? Let's see if you're right. Boom! Gideon, Ally of Zendikar, is the best Standard card of 2016. It's not even close. Let me give you a statistic real quick. Gideon ally of Zendikar has been in 434 top 16 decks in premier level events in 2016. 434. That number doesn't even make sense. Gideon's in everything. I can't think of a white deck that doesn't run Gideon. Blue-white flash, vehicles, collected company, white-green tokens, all human decks, white-black control, any control deck with white, actually, Obza and aggro at the beginning of the year. I honestly can't think of a white deck that didn't consistently run Gideon, except maybe Rally the Ancestors, but come on, the color of that deck didn't matter. You get my point. But anyways, really think about it. The top 5 best decks this year by sheer amount of Grand Prix and SCG Open top 8 appearances were Band Company, Green-White Tokens, Band Humans, Mono-White Humans, and Delirium. Gideon was a playset staple in 3 of those strategies and a sideboard staple in 1 other. The dude's everywhere, providing immediate board presence, a fast clock, and a huge body that's difficult to remove. Gideon really did it all. If we're looking at the numbers and the real impact on Standard, Gideon has to take it, arguably the most powerful card in Standard in 2016. Now I'm sure that many of you are going to disagree with this list for one reason or another. Please let me know what you think in the comments below and we'll talk about it. Now just remember, this list was made using statistics from all top 16 finishes of Grand Prix, SCG Opens, PTQs, and all other high-level events. The reason one card is above another? The math. The answer is always the math. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time. This video is brought to you in part by TCGplayer.com. With 2016 drawing to a close, it's probably a good time to start preparing for 2017. What better way to prepare than with some awesome pre-orders? If you want to pre-order Aether Revolt, you can do that literally right now, $92 per box. If you don't have a local game store or they're charging way too much, TCG Player has your back. Click the link, it helps the channel, buy a box if you want, we all win. Hugs for everyone. Enjoy.